What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to basketball. And more importantly, welcome back to our season preview series. This is episode 6, I believe, and the last episode that I'm pre-recording because as of right now, I'm on my honeymoon. I got married. I'm in Jamaica for the time being, so I'm trying to get these pre-recorded and get them out to you. But for those of you that don't know, this is the series where we're going to go in-depth on every single team before the start of the NBA season. We're going to talk about goals with the team, their off-season, their roster breakdown, their salary cap breakdown, what kind of assets are they working with, potential moves that they could make, their current rotation, and then finally, where do we think that they're going to go at this very moment? It's a lot to cover, but I want you guys to be prepared for the start of the season, and I want to give every team their chance to shine. So hey, make sure you guys like, subscribe, and comment. I've responded to every single comment on my YouTube channel up to this point, and I intend to keep on doing so. All right, let's get into it. Alrighty, so we're back here on the season preview spreadsheet. For those of you that don't know, these are like the spreadsheets that I like to build to kind of help with the storytelling of all these kind of videos that I do, but this is a pretty basic one. If you guys do want access to the spreadsheet, it's a pretty simple process to go to. I'm happy to give it out to you guys. All you have to do is leave me a comment saying like, hey, I would like access to the spreadsheet. I'll give you a link to my Discord. You can then go on the Discord and shoot me a message there, and I'll hook you up with it there. Pretty nice, pretty simple. It also boosts my algorithm then, so everybody wins. I try to be transparent with that stuff. But anyway, Philadelphia 76ers. This is another fun one. A lot of stuff to talk about with this one. A lot of stuff. Philadelphia had an interesting season last year, to say the least. We saw complete dominance from Joel Embiid for what, like 30, 40 games. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it wasn't even that long. Clear MVP. Like, this is the guy, like, he is dominating the league like we haven't seen in a long time. He gets hurt. Man, that sucks. He gets hurt, and we don't even think we're going to get him back at some point during the season. But he ends up coming back around the end of the season for the playoffs. Definitely not 100% of himself, but, you know, is what is. Oh, there's a bug. Come here. Oh, got it. I've been trying to get that bug for a couple hours, thank God. But anyway, Joel Embiid comes back. You know, he's kind of a shell of himself. He's really lacking like a ton of mobility, and mobility wasn't always a great thing for him anyway. So now you're like, okay, what's really going to happen with that, right? But in the midst of all that, Tyrese Maxey like comes onto the scene as like a true star. We're like, yep, this is the guy, right? Like he really looks the part. He's playing the part. He looks awesome, right? And so Tyrese Maxey's kind of establishing himself as one of the better players in the league. Obviously being an all-star and everything, that's awesome. The rest of the team is kind of iffy, to say the least. Tobias Harris was kind of struggling at points. They make a trade for Buddy Hield and then decide like not to play him, which still kind of confuses me to this day. They bring in Kyle Lowry at one point to be a nice veteran addition, and he was a good pickup, but it's hard. Like, the rest of the roster doesn't quite make a ton of sense, and so they look to the offseason. They set themselves up in a really good spot to where basically the only person that was on the roster after this season was Embiid and then Paul Reed, and they went out and they're like, hey, we're going to use all this cap space and go make some big time moves and try to reconstruct the roster, and they did a pretty good job of it. But where do we find ourselves at? So obviously 47 and 35 last year. They were a lot better with Joel Embiid than without Joel Embiid, which, surprise, surprise, when your best player is healthy, you play better, right? It should be noted that Joel Embiid is obviously playing on Team USA right now as well. Hopefully going to get himself into some better shape. I know a lot of people have been commenting on how he still doesn't look like he's in shape, and I'd probably tend to agree with that. And it's hard to come back from these injuries. It just is. But we'll talk more about like his mobility and everything later. This franchise is obviously contending. For those of you that don't know, I have 4 categories here: the selling, rebuilding, growing, or contending. This team is clearly contending. They've got a really, really good roster. They've got a tough road ahead of them. But you know what? You don't get much closer to the contending or like contending level team than this right here. So what are our goals for this season? We have establish a winning play style. What does that mean? That means we need this coaching staff to come in and basically try something new, because we've seen too many times where this, at least core of Embiid, where he's the focal point, they go into the playoffs, they're very much used to walking the ball up the court, feeding Embiid down on the block and letting him kind of go to work in kind of that mid-range operating area, and then backing people down, doing what he's got to do out of the post. It doesn't translate well to the playoffs. Teams have time to game plan for it. They stop it every single time, and no matter who's been around him, it hasn't worked, right? So while we can win regular season games, we need something that when we get to the playoffs, teams are going to have to work a little bit harder to stop. So maybe that's running through Tyrese Maxey and Paul George more and letting Embiid kind of like play off of them in some capacity. Luckily, they've got a coach and Nurse he's a smart guy. He's put together abstract game plans before that people haven't really thought of, and hopefully we can find something new for the team there. But that's what I'm saying. We got to establish a winning playing style, something that can translate into the postseason and help them win. Find some size at the wing, and we'll take a look at the depth chart later. But one thing that we're seeing from this team is it's pretty undersized outside of the center position, and I worry about that a little bit just because we know who's in their conference, right? They got to get by the Knicks and they got to get by the Celtics. A lot of size on those wings, so something to look for. And then build Maxey into a top 5 point guard. I think that there's an opportunity to push this kid really, really far. He's a hard worker. He's shown that he can just hoop in whatever style you play him in. If we can continue to push him up, and, calling somebody a top 5 point guard, that's subjective, obviously, at the end of the way, and that's technically a bad goal. But I guess what I'm trying to say, or more so say, is be like, hey, put this guy in the upper echelon, like, conversation where everyone's like, yep, this is that dude. Like, he's an absolute killer. Like, we have to figure out a way to stop him every single moment that we can. He's just an undeniable one of the best players out there in basketball, so we got to get there. But let's go talk about this offseason, because there was a lot of roster turnover. So this is normally how big I have this screen, but I had to move it like all the way over here in order to like actually make this functional. And you know what? Maybe I'll even zoom out just a little bit more so that we can kind of see everybody in some capacity. Does it work to go there? Yeah, that's good enough. We'll go there. So we've got a couple different categories here. We've got drafted players. We've got player departures, players brought in. Drafted players, you can figure it out. Player departures are players that were on the team at the end of last season that are no longer on the team. Players brought in, opposite, players that weren't on the team last year that are now on the team. Any re-signs like Tyrese Maxey or anything, they're just still on the team, right? That doesn't matter as much. So starting with the draft, right, we've got Jared McCain. He was the first round pick, guard coming out of Duke, falls into that kind of combo guard role. In all transparency, I'm not personally too high on Jared McCain. If you are, that's obviously totally fine. What I will say about Jared McCain is he's got some skills that could be beneficial to this team, right? The effort is insane out of this kid. Like his motor is awesome. His energy is great, amazing, and a great catch and shoot player, right? This guy catches fires from just about anywhere and he hits on a high clip. So that's awesome. That's always good to have. I get a little bit concerned having him on a team next to like a Kyle Lowry and a Tyrese Maxey, right? Insert other small guard here, like a Eric Gordon or something like that, right? That we see here, and you're like, okay, we've got a really small backcourt then that we don't necessarily feel great if they ever get swapped onto wings. He lacks some like explosiveness and some creativity with the ball, but he's a rookie at the end of the day. He's going to grow and hopefully get better and stuff, but hopefully the shooting can still be of value as of right now. Then in the second round, they took Adam Bona here, who is just going to be kind of a reserve center for them, kind of just a run, jump, and dunk guy. Doesn't do a whole lot else from that here, but, cheap contract to fill out the rest of the roster. Let's talk about players that left in some capacity, because there are a lot of them. Tobias Harris obviously was a big focal point for this team for the last couple years. Philly kind of ran him out after his playoff performance, which was admittedly pretty rough. Tobias Harris, I like to think, is probably going to be just fine in the NBA, though, going forward. I mean, he's been a really good player for a long time and kind of a self-made guy, so I think he'll be fine. Buddy Hield, again, a trade that made a lot of sense for them, and it just, like, they didn't get him on the court for whatever reason. Not really sure what happened there. Nick Batum, I believe he went back to the Clippers, right? He was a big part of their playoff success. He had a couple really, really good games. He was a really nice wing for them. No longer here. Cam Payne, absolute just vibes guy, no longer there. B-Ball Paul, who burst onto the scene for them, they traded him to Detroit. D'Anthony Melton, he left in free agency, I believe, for Golden State. Was a really good player at one point. Battled some injuries in his time in Philly, so that's unfortunate. Rocco, who is still just a free agent now. I suppose they could bring him back if they really wanted to. And then Mo Bamba, who, again, continues to not quite find his footing in the NBA. But who did we bring in? Because that's the interesting thing. Like, we saw a couple, especially these kind of names here, being pretty prominent ones. Obviously, Paul Reed played a good amount of minutes, but where are we at now? Well, they brought in Paul George, probably the best player in free agency, right? Brought in Paul George. They've been looking for that wing with some size, which is good, for a long time now. Paul George, I've always said, is the ultimate all-star role player, meaning he's all-star good, but he's also like a role player in the sense where he's like, all right, whatever you need me to do this game, I got you. If you need me to go get you 30, I got 30 for you. You need me to be a ball handler, I got you. Lock up the best guy, I got you. He can be a passer, he can handle, he can shoot, like he can do a bit of everything, and he can do it at an all-star level, and he's cool to do it at whatever level. He fits in with pretty much anyone. awesome. Those are the guys you love to have, and they've been looking for a guy to like this to put next to like Maxey and Joel Embiid for a while. They went and got him. He's locked up for a while. That's awesome. They went and got Andre Drummond, who's debatably the best backup center in basketball. His rebounding and honestly a lot of his defense is pretty good. Obviously the rebounding is elite. The defense is pretty good just because people don't like to run into him, and even if he's not blocking a ton of shots, he just gets in the way so much. So having a guy that whenever Embiid isn't in, he can start spot games for you, because we all know Embiid's probably going to get hurt at points, and fingers crossed he doesn't, but there's just going to be points to where he comes in and just cleans up the glass and makes everyone's life a lot easier. We've also had some pretty sizable additions in some of the veteran departments, like Caleb Martin coming over from the Miami Heat. Caleb Martin has been a pretty staple part of the Miami Heat, having that sustained success, obviously bringing a lot of defensive intensity, being able to shoot the ball, being able to put the ball on the floor, a pretty good amount. So just a guy to kind of keep the offense moving if you want to go to more of a drive and kick type thing around Embiid, something like that. Great player to have. Eric Gordon, obviously just an established vet, been around the NBA for a long time, knows how to get buckets in high quantities. I believe he shot the ball like really well last season too on a pretty high clip. The undersizedness can be a question at points. He is pretty long despite his height, which that's kind of a theme of this team that's growing, is a very like long, like wide team in that sense, which is kind of interesting, but they're a little bit undersized in the height department. Then bring in Reggie Jackson again, just a nice veteran reserve guard. Got connections with a couple different guys on this team, good for chemistry in that sense. Just been around for a little bit. He's going to be a good reserve guard option with at least like a little bit more size. I'm saying very little bit in that department, but is what it is. Let's go and do an actual roster breakdown. So obviously you guys recognize this sheet if you watch the Ideal Offseason series at all. It's pretty much the same sheet. It's just a little bit different. This is a really good way for us to do a depth chart breakdown, a salary cap breakdown, take a look at draft picks, just player personnel in general. But I think a good place to always start is the actual salary cap itself here, because it gives a lot of context for how the team can move going forward, right? And for those of you that don't know how these 4 different levels of the salary cap work, I would recommend going and watching like my first or second like video in this series. I believe that's the Celtics and Grizzlies videos. I give a lot more context as to why they're important. If you guys ever do want to see like everything that goes into these things, I kind of have them listed here should you want to, but know that in essence, these aprons are new to basketball as of like the past like season or two. And they're really restricting how teams can do things. The NBA had a problem where they were like, hey, too many star players are moving like all the time. It's really annoying. Like the trades are just happening too much. That's not good for basketball in the sense that it's not good for like fan bases and getting attached to players. That's better for team revenue at the end of the day. And personally, I think it's more fun when players stay where they're at and kind of build that longevity with teams, but that's just me. So the NBA put in these aprons to basically say, hey, if you're one of these teams that spends this much money, we're going to start to constrict you, meaning it's going to be a lot harder for you to make moves. You're basically going to be stuck with the teams that you have. When you get into that second apron, it becomes really, really hard to make trades. Essentially, you can't like package people together anymore. In trades, you either have to match salary or come down in salary, which obviously you're not bringing any more star players if that's the case. First apron, you even get restricted on how much money you can take back in. But good news for Philly in this case is while they are in the first apron, and that's scary enough, that limits you in a lot of different ways, as you can see here, it's not the second apron. The second apron makes it like damn near impossible to go anywhere but down a lot of times. So, and that's the idea of it, right? It's kind of like a pseudo hard cap in a lot of ways, and technically does hard cap you in certain ways. But Philly still has $9 million before they hit the second apron. And now part of that is they still have 2 open roster spots currently. And so like Robert Covington's like still out there. They could still go out and like re-sign him or something. But let's just say they go get 2 more veteran minimum type guys, because since they're already in the luxury tax, they can't offer anybody more than a veteran minimum unless they were on their team last season, which Robert Covington, I believe, is the only one left, and you're not giving him that much money. So you've got 2 basically minimum contract spots left that you could use to fill some other positions on this team. And minimum contracts are not going to take us into the second apron. So this team's going to have at least some flexibility to make some moves during the season, which is awesome. That's really, really cool. And there's going to be the ability to make some moves still, which is good. That makes us feel really, really good about things. Let's talk about draft picks a little bit. No 2025 picks. They don't exist for this team, unfortunately, which that sucks. Like that does, it's a really good draft class is what we're kind of expecting. People are valuing that pick a lot, but you know what? You're trying to win right now. It's not the biggest deal. You do have the 2026 pick. That's not going to be a lot of use to you currently, obviously, because you don't have the 2025 pick. You can't use the 26 one. You do have another one that's pretty complicated, but it's there. You've got some 27 second round picks that you can use. You actually have a good amount of second round picks, which is good because you can't be taking back too much salary in a lot of these moves. So presumably the Sixers are going to be in spots where they're like, let me add this role player here. Let me add this role player here. And that's where these second round picks can come in handy. You do have like a 28 first round pick from like the Clippers. That's going to be extremely valuable. We don't know how good or bad they're going to be. I know a lot of Sixers fans are like, don't trade that pick. It's the future or whatever. Y'all trying to win right now. I don't know about y'all. I would move it personally and try to go get you something. I don't know what it is right now, and that's part of the problem, right? Is I don't know what's out there, and so I can't in good conscience say like, oh yeah, you got to trade this pick without giving you something to actually like attach it to. So just know that I'm on team. Let's find a use for it. More so. Again, a couple other second round picks, and you've got a good amount of first round picks under your control going forward. So this team's in a pretty healthy spot considering like how good their roster is right now because they did things the right way. They went into free agency, found all their guys, set themselves up to just bring in the talent that way and not have to move assets for it. That's amazing. Let's talk about the roster itself. As you can see, only 2 guys on 1-year contracts. So this team is locked up for a while to go. And like, you're not seeing like options or anything in the way here. It's just them boys on the squad right now. Obviously, you got Embiid. That's your boy, right? He's got 3 years left on his deal. Awesome. Paul George just signed his max contract. There he is. Maxey just got his like super max contract for his age. Caleb Martin, 4-year, very friendly deal at like $8 million. Like, we'll take that all the time for like these 3-and-D wings. Wish he was a little bit taller, but it'll do. Kelly Oubre, who had a pretty good season for them last season, really good cutting without the basketball and everything, which is big when you have guys like Embiid out there that attract so much attention. Still got 2 years of Kelly Oubre. That's awesome. They brought back KJ Martin, kind of an underrated pickup as he's been like a sneaky good shooter at points in his career. He does have like a little bit more size and strength, and more importantly, he's got some athleticism and a little bit of youth because this team is also missing a bit of youth. What do I mean by that? A lot of times when you get these older teams, you want those guys that can really go out and run and get you some easy buckets. Obviously, you've got Tyrese Maxey, and that's a really big thing, and that's really nice. But after that, I mean, you get into like the Jared McCains, and like he's not probably going to kill anybody in transition or anything like that. So getting a KJ Martin to kind of run with people is a nice pickup. We talked about Andre Drummond, very team-friendly deal for 2 seasons. That's awesome. Jared McCain just starting his rookie deal. Awesome. Eric Gordon, basically a 2-year minimum. Like, it's not quite, but it's pretty damn close. Kyle Lowry and Reggie Jackson, both 1-year minimum guys. That's great. And then you've got a couple of like developmental pieces. I know a lot of Sixers fans are high on Ricky Council. I personally haven't seen like enough out of him to really justify anything yet, but he's interesting nonetheless, and you've got him for a couple more seasons at a very friendly contract, so we don't complain. And this is the benefit of having like second round picks on these championship teams, is that you can get these guys for really cheap, lock them up for a long time, and then you just kind of have this developmental guy on the team. Great use of roster space and salary space. Good job, Sixers organization. If we can break down the depth chart a little bit, this is the first 5 that I kind of imagined, which is pretty cool in all honesty. Like, who knows what they'll actually go with here, but this is kind of what I pictured for the time being. Like, obviously you got Maxey, Embiid, Paul George. Elite players, they make a lot of sense on paper next to each other. You just got to put the right system around it. And then you also got Caleb Martin and Kelly Oubre, who similar size, similar abilities, right? A little bit of shooting, a little bit of ball handling, some pretty good defense, some good energy, and there's a lot of switchability between your 4 through 2 here, which is awesome, right? Especially when you have such a defensive anchor like Embiid out there. If you can be switching and have good defensive long presence around everybody else, that's awesome. So we feel great about the first 5 right now. Obviously, it could always get better, but we like where it's at right now. What do we have with the rest of the depth chart? You look at the point guard position, Kyle Lowry's still really good in like spotty minutes. Like, he can still generate a lot of defensive stops. He can still generate a lot of his own shot making and creating, can play without the basketball too, which is awesome. So a great reserve guard to have on the team, just a big effort guy, keeps the team on the steady and narrow, right? Reggie Jackson, kind of the same thing, not quite as productive as like a Kyle Lowry is at this point, but you've got some stability in the backcourt. you feel pretty good about that. You look at the shooting guard. We got a lot of those type guys. Eric Gordon, again, going to be out there for three-point shooting. You need guys like that. Jared McCain basically is Eric Gordon, but younger. That's kind of how I view him. So a little bit of repetition there. And then Ricky Council, we'll see what we end up getting out of him this year. So we've got a lot of guys at kind of this, like, combo guard position, which does worry me a bit defensively, because once you go to your bench and stuff, and maybe this is just staggering these guys appropriately, and that's part of coaching, right? But you don't really have a ton of like wing size coming off the bench, and so that makes me a little bit nervous. We talked about KJ Martin should be good for some spot minutes here or there. Andre Drummond is probably one of the best backup centers you can have, and then you got a project in Bona out there as well, that at least you still have some size if something happens to somebody else. But now the question still remains. We've got 2 roster spots still available. How can we fill those for the time being? And then also what kind of moves are out there to be made? So what I want to do is I'm going to explore that just a little bit with you guys, kind of see what's out there. We'll look at who's left in free agency that could add some value. It's definitely going to be wing players. And then we'll also just take a look at maybe like a mock trade or something like that. We're not obviously going to update this sheet because this is a season preview. We're trying to just get you guys ready for what they currently have. A reminder that this is 8/6 is when I'm recording this, so it's because I'm on my honeymoon. I had to pre-record this stuff, so if something has changed since then, I'll make another little video just detailing like all of that, just being like, okay, here's the updated outlook on it, just because I think that'd be a good thing to do. But let's get into it and talk about what could be. All right, let's take a look at some available free agents. We need wings, right? We need wings. Doug McDermott, always a pretty solid option at the end of the day, just because he's consistently an elite shooter. He also can put the ball on the floor a little bit. You're not getting a ton defensively out of him, but at least you would get a little bit more size on the wing. And hey, when you got guys like this on the team that can create a little bit more, just having like a knockdown shooter would probably be a good fit for them. Chetty Osman kind of fits that like very similar mold for them. Talen Horton-Tucker, more of a ball handler, obviously. I mean, they have him listed as a shooting guard. Dude's played everything 1 through 4, it feels like, at this point, and it sounds like he's even contemplating going overseas. But I think that's an interesting option. I would avoid like the Landry Shamits of the world. Again, just adding like undersized guards, I'm not really all that interested in. I guess Evan Fournier can kind of fall into that situation there. Jordan Nwora could be interesting as like a really cheap option, but again, like it really shouldn't matter as long as you're giving out minimum contracts. Lonnie Walker, I just think is a good option for anybody to pick up in general. Again, a little bit undersized, but he did play at least good defense, so he plays a bit bigger than his position, which is good. But yeah, that's kind of what we're seeing out of like at least the available free agents. Javonte Green is another interesting one that you could throw out there, that he's smaller, but he plays a lot bigger than he actually is. So those are kind of the names that I see available. Let's talk about like a potential trade or something that could still take place. Alrighty, so we're back here on Fanspo. Always love getting to go on Fanspo and figure out exactly how we can make all of these trades happen. One of the first ones that I think would be kind of interesting to explore is that of the Charlotte Hornets and Miles Bridges. The Miles Bridges signing didn't make a whole lot of sense for the Charlotte Hornets. The only way it really makes sense is if they do plan on trading him in some capacity, and he's on a pretty like friendly deal for his ability. It's just like nobody wanted him or wanted to deal with him. So we can look at how we could bring him in and bring a little bit more size in, a little bit more ability. Obviously there's a lot of recently signed things on here, so we're working a little bit out of order right now. This would be like something to explore later in the season or something, but Charlotte presumably wants some assets for this guy. Maybe this is something where you throw I know Sixers fans, calm down. Just be with me for a second, all right? Maybe you throw this pick at them, and then do we have somebody that we can really throw a decent amount of money at? Like, again, this is where the KJ Martin one kind of comes in a little bit. That's an interesting one to throw at somebody. Who else could we throw in here? I don't know, like how much money are we really off? We're off quite a bit, right? You need to cut another 19-ish million. See, this is the thing, these trades make it so difficult nowadays. I'm not even sure. Yeah, I don't think we could reasonably do it without unloading like the rest of these guys, so we gotta look somewhere else. This eliminates like a Zach LaVine type trade as well. There's just no way it's really possible without giving up one of your core, so gotta find someone cheaper. Is there a world where Kevin Huerter can come here? He obviously brings some shooting, a little bit more size, allows us to move someone else to the bench potentially. So let's just say, so Huerter is 16 million, so we got to try and get close to that. Again, I don't want to throw a Kelly Oubre in it, so this is something where we throw KJ Martin at him again, right? And we've got to get close salary-wise. I don't know how we can reasonably do it without giving up one of these other guys. So maybe I should look at it this way, because I'm doing the math now and this isn't going to work. So a combination of like KJ Martin, maybe like Reggie Jackson, and the pick is what's going to be valuable. So we need to look at somebody more in the $10 million range. So what I'm doing is just like sorting all the contracts and going to around like $10 million and seeing what we can or can't find here. Like Jared Vanderbilt doesn't help us a ton. Aaron Wiggins, they clearly want him for quite a bit longer. Jeff Green's an interesting name. I don't know how much they care. Derrick Jones Jr., if the Clippers start going downhill, yeah, you could make something work with that. They're going to say like, oh, give us our first round pick back and everything. So maybe that's not a negotiating spot that you necessarily want to be in, just because you're not going to get the same quality that you should, because you should get something good for that player. It's going to be hard. It's going to be really, really hard. Like a Zeke Naji, no, we don't really need somebody in that position. Naji Marshall's in Dallas now, so he's not going to want to do something like that. Let me find somebody. Hear me out for like just a second. Is there a world where they can bring in Kuminga? Like, is there any world where that happens? Like, you throw enough draft picks at Golden State. The news about like Lauri Markkanen not going there just kind of broke today. So maybe there's something that can kind of happen there. I don't know, but let's explore Derrick Jones Jr. for like just a second, right? Like, how easy would this be to do? You send KJ back over there. Obviously, Derrick Jones Jr. would come back here in some capacity. Is that close enough? Hard to say. Just for the sake of it, I'm not saying that this is exactly how it would happen. You throw Ricky Council in there. Maybe you throw a first-round pick at them. I don't think you'd give them this one, but you could probably give them like your 2029 first or something like that. Let's presume that Derrick Jones Jr. is having another good season. The trade failed, yeah, because they're recently signed or whatever, but just assume that this happens like later in the season or something. So something like that in some capacity, right? That's kind of what I'm imagining. You move someone else maybe to the bench or something like that, or you just have some more bench depth because of that. Could be a good move to make, but let's move on to the rotation question mark. I put a question mark because who knows what they're actually going to go with. This is just me doing the activity as a coach to be like, hey, what's kind of the goal in minutes that we're trying to keep everybody around so that we can keep people healthy and so that we can also be competitive. Obviously, you're going to have some games where they play a lot more and some where they play a lot less. Where are we kind of trying to average out at? Maxey hasn't even hit his prime yet. We're running this guy to the ground, like, and he sure seems like he can. Like, I want Maxey to be the leading scorer on this team if possible. In all honesty, like, that's what I'd like. I'd rather him be the killer than Embiid in a lot of cases. I'd rather them be afraid of Embiid and he becomes a secondary option because he's harder to stop. That's how I view it. Caleb Martin is going to get a ton of minutes along with Paul George. Paul George obviously getting a little bit older, and we do have some other people at his position, so trying to keep him fresh is going to be something to go with there. So these guys all playing very similar minutes. Going to the bench, I see Kyle Lowry and kind of Eric Gordon being those first two guys off the bench, just being defensive, hopefully minded veterans still that can space the floor, shoot the ball a little bit, just kind of maintain the game. You hopefully make a rotation where Paul George and Embiid are still in the game with them, so that you have some length and some people for them to play off of. I think that makes a lot of sense. Drummond's only getting 17 minutes because him and Embiid are never going to play together. He just gets all the minutes that Embiid's not on the court. Comes out to 17 minutes. KJ Martin, again, you want him out there running. Makes a ton of sense, and I think you should give Jared McCain some experience at the very least. Let him come in, try to be a spark plug for minutes here and there. Just catch, shoot, and then try not to get torched on defense. That's what I'm kind of viewing it as. Obviously, we got Reggie Jackson, Council, and Bona still there. Maybe Ricky Council finds his way into the rotation. Hard to say. But again, there's 2 roster spots left. So who knows who they fill that out with. I wouldn't mind the Doug McDermott one that we talked about before. But this is kind of what I imagine. But anyway, let's finish this out with going to the standings and predictions here. So we got 5 teams on the board already. Where do I think the Sixers are going to come out in the East? Pretty simple one here. When I click that button, it's going to reveal. Let's do a drum roll, please. I'm sure you guys aren't going to have any opposite opinions on this one. Got them as the 4 seed. Got them as the 4 seed. I worry that teams are just catching on to Embiid a bit too much, and he seems like he's slowing down. But this team is still absolutely loaded. The team looks really good. They did a phenomenal job this offseason doing all this. I mean, I don't need to explain it to you. Just like look at this team. It's a really nice looking team. So hopefully they fill out kind of the rest of their roster. They use up the last 2 roster spots well. Maybe they can make a trade, add a little bit more depth to the wing. But as far as like first 5 goes, pretty damn good. Like, should be able to get out and move, keep the ball on the floor. Just hope that the play style reflects a little bit of change. But I think they should be good for the 4 in this one, and that's kind of where I got them. But hey, I want to know what you guys think at the end of the day. Make sure you guys are cool with each other in the comments section. Don't get into any wars with people. We're trying to be better than the rest of the internet. That's what I always try to remind people of on here. Is I kind of have a no nonsense policy in the comments. Like, I want you guys to be like very good at conversing like civilized people down there. So try to be good down there. The next video that you guys see in this series, it should be I should be back from my honeymoon. Don't expect me to tan. I don't tan. I'm pasty all the time. But I look forward to continuing this series. So hey, thanks so much as always, y'all. We'll talk to you later.